Hello everybody and welcome to another movie review. This time we're going to be reviewing I.S.S, which is a movie about what would happen if World War III broke out and what would happen to the people that are at the International Space Station. So this movie is directed by Gabriela Cowperthwaite, and one of the things that was very impressive about this movie is its low budget. So this movie, for all of its visual effects shots, it's only $13.8 million. You know, I commend the director and the studio for greenlighting this movie and not burdening it with a big budget. When I first heard about the concept of this movie, which was astronauts turning against each other as their respective countries were going to war, it kind of reminded me a little bit of board games, like maybe like stuff like Secret Hitler and like other board games where there's kind of like a killer and you have to figure out who you can trust and who you can't trust and stuff like that. I think this movie would have been more interesting if we didn't know who the killer was right away, because we see the two countries kind of like conspiring against each other, and I thought that was a missed opportunity to create a little bit more of intrigue of what's going on and who's responsible. Even though I would recommend this movie for you to go and check it, I think that this movie misses a lot of opportunities to be something truly great. But I did want to touch on other things in a deeper spoilers discussion. So if you haven't seen this movie and you want to experience it for the first time without spoilers, you can pause the video now and go watch it. So one of the problems with this film is that for its low budget, even though it's very commendable that they went ahead and made this movie for the low budget, it kind of shows throughout the film, especially any shots that you are either outside of the ISS or you're looking down on Earth. So there's a scene in particular that one of the characters, he tells another character, please don't look down at the Earth because there's stuff happening, right? And as a viewer, I was kind of watching that and I couldn't tell what was going on. The Earth they use here was blurry. It looked like a low-res model that they found online and just animated it to rotate, but any shots of the Earth, they were so hard to see what was going on. And when that particular scene happens, I was looking at the Earth and I couldn't tell if it was just city lights or if the lights were coming from explosions, from nukes and stuff like that. In that sense, I thought that they should have maybe invested a little bit more to get those space shots looking really good. And then that could have been a reason to go watch this film. But I think if you are somebody that just likes really amazing cinematography in space, I think in this movie, like some of these shots look a little rough. So if you are particularly judgmental of poor CGI, you might look at this movie and kind of like laugh at it in a sense, because yeah, it was not great. If you can tolerate it, then it might be good for you. So I think one of the biggest issues of this movie is the tone of this movie. Throughout the whole movie, there's so much tension. And you could say, well, it makes sense, you know, they're dealing with a war and they don't know who to trust. And I agree with that. But the problem is that the whole movie, it has a very tense tone. And there is no contrast on a before and after, as like the tension is kind of going up. There's an inciting incident, and from that moment on, it's just very tense throughout the whole film. There's very little, you know, scenes to kind of like relieve yourself of that much tension. And I think that that might make this movie a little bit hard to watch. And also the movie is very depressing, you know, like when all these astronauts start dying one by one and like turning on each other, I think that becomes a very depressing thing to watch and to witness. I see what the director is trying to say by stripping the humanity out of these characters and making them into savages, but I think that they didn't play around with the idea of the fact that these people are astronauts and they have worked for a long time together and they have collaborated together. It just goes straight into turning with each other, and I think that that made it so that you didn't really root for any of them because they were just behaving kind of animalistic way. And I think that in having such a serious tone, that's another problem of the movie, is that the movie takes itself very seriously, extremely seriously, but I think that the budget and the writing don't support this approach to take itself very seriously. What I mean by that is that even though the movie is trying to be serious, because they lack the budget, they can have a proper telling of this situation. So one of the things they do in the movie, which I think is kind of silly, is that they only have 3 astronauts from the US and 3 astronauts from Russia on the International Space Station. That to me right there was such low-hanging fruit, because everybody knows that, you know, US and Russia don't get along. Let's make a movie about space and let's make it about Russians and Americans in the space station. I think it would have been so much more interesting if there were other countries in the mix. You know, what if France was in the space station and they didn't know what side their country took on Earth and they had to side with one of the sides? You know, what if India or China or like another country was in the space station? I think that would have added a sense of reality to the movie, because that is how it is in real life. You have astronauts from all different countries. And I think that would have added like a more kind of a board game dynamic, where it's like you have different teams, you know, with different objectives. You know, maybe one team objective was to get the cure, but maybe another other team's objective was to take control of the navigation systems of the ISS. I think that would have been more interesting instead of having like 3 Americans against 3 Russians. I thought that was kind of silly and made the movie just a little cliche for me. So that was the first cliche that happens very early on in the movie, having the Russians seem like the villains right away. That felt a little bit like low-hanging fruit and something that was like a very easy to write script. Even though there are developments later on in the movies, we find out that the Christian, who's American, it's also kind of going crazy and doing evil stuff. Just by having the Russians be evil, like from at the beginning, created a first impression of a very cliche movie. And I didn't like that. I think it would have been more interesting to kind of having a more realistic scenario and having other different astronauts from different countries, and not necessarily have Americans be like the good guys and then Russians be like the cold-hearted people. I also think that this movie has bad writing for the sake of symbolism and foreshadowing. So one of the things that I saw early on, which I thought was super silly, is we have Kira, who is some kind of biologist or behavioral biologist, and she brings mice with her to the space station. She's new to the space station. She's, very amateurish. She's still getting used to everything. She's like the odd man out of the group, and she's new in the space station. She's learning everything. But I thought it was so silly that this girl brings her mice with her. She puts the mice on this cage, and she just leaves these poor mice just like floating around in space, and she just goes away. And I thought that was so silly. Like, imagine you being a biologist and researching mice your whole life, and then you see these mice floating in like, how, if I were me, right, I would just stare at these mice for hours, like be fascinated by the mice, because I've never seen animals, how they behave in 0G. So for her to just walk away and just leave these poor mice just like floating around, I thought that was so stupid. And I thought it made her seem very inexperienced. Why wasn't she taking notes of how these poor mice were reacting to zero gravity? And the mice are just there to kind of serve the purpose of symbolism. And later on, we see that the mice like started attacking each other until only 2 survived. So that was there for the purpose of foreshadowing that only 2 could survive at a time. Like if it was a bigger group, there would be like too much conflict and only 2 people could survive at a time. So I thought that in doing that foreshadowing, it was kind of silly to see her like be like a bad scientist, because she was not taking notes. She was not, doing any research. And she will barely look at the mice. Like she will barely see how the mice were behaving throughout her stay. If that was her purpose there, if the purpose of Kira was to study how animals behaved in space, she was doing a horrible job, because she barely was studying the mice. She sees them like twice. And then the other thing that was done for story purposes rather than realism, and I also thought it was silly, is it was having all of these astronauts just partying, drinking alcohol, getting drunk. And my first reaction to that was, there's no way that these astronauts are allowed to drink alcohol in real life. And I told my sister, who was sitting next to me, and I was like, there's no way these people can drink, right? And she's like, yeah, there's no way that astronauts can drink alcohol. So I looked it up, and that is not a thing. Like, astronauts are not allowed to have alcohol, because first of all, they could get drunk, but also if it like escapes, it can damage the equipment. I also thought that one of the things that made this movie not as good as it could be is the fact that when the nuclear warfare like breaks out, it's not a gradual incline, right? Instead, it's like the whole world starts burning up with nukes, and we see the Earth just completely burnt and destroyed. They just absolutely annihilated each other like in the course of 1 hour. That made the stakes of the movie less severe, because think about it, right? So if the world is destroyed, why would you kill your friends to get back to it? When you get back, it might already be too late. I think it would have been more interesting if they saw like a nuke or 2 go off, and then they were like, oh, like, is there a war going on? What's happening? What country is helping which country? Like, what's going on? We see so many nukes, like 100 nukes, like 1,000 nukes, I don't know. But like the Earth, it's like red. The entire Earth is on fire from nukes. And you just assume that most of humanity, it's already been killed. And I felt that to me, like, even though it's a visual, it's like what sells the movie. I think in real life, it just made them killing each other a little bit more silly. Because if you see that the whole Earth is just destroying each other, that would be a better incentive to not worry too much about going back. It's like, it sucks, but it looks like they're all killed each other, we just have to survive together. But if they had done like 1 or 2 or 3 nukes, that would have created more tension, because there's something to get back to, after they leave the space station. So I thought that was another thing that was a little too overkill. That's why at the end, right, when Kira and Alexei get back to Earth, I mean, like, where are you even gonna go? Like the whole world is on fire. Where are you even gonna land? So I thought that was another thing that I wish the movie hadn't done, just having So many nukes just going around. So another thing that I found very silly was the way Gordon kind of goes out. Gordon, he gets a message from the US that, listen, don't trust the Russians, you have to take control of the I.S.S. And as the leader of the Americans, he assumes that the Russians got the same message. And then, this guy who knows that information goes on a mission that was fabricated by a Russian. Like, why would you go out on a mission that a Russian is telling you when you just learned this information? That to me was so silly. And that wasn't even the worst part, okay? So this guy, he's out in space, he's in this mission that the Russian gives him, and communications go out. And this guy has a brilliant idea to cut the safety rope. So after all of this suspicious activity going on with the, no communication, he has the brilliant idea to cut off his safety rope and make jumps through the I.S.S. And surprise, surprise, this guy gets lost in space. And I'm thinking, like, there's no way that an astronaut is watching this movie and not like feeling annoyed about what's happening, because how dumb do you have to be to, first of all, go on a mission issued by the Russians that you were told to betray, and you were told that they are probably going to do the same to you. So you go on the mission that they give you. Then, when no communication works, you did have the brilliant idea to cut the safety rope and make jumps around the I.S.S. So when he's presumed dead, then we have Veronica, who was dating this guy, and she completely loses it. And I thought that as a woman scientist in this very serious position, she was acting very crazy, okay? So she goes to Kira and she tells her, like, listen, I trust you. You seem very nice. You told me your orders. I trust you. I'm going to distract the Russians. And you have to get this secret medicine that Alexei was developing. It's for radiation poisoning. And you should give it to whoever you decide should get it. I mean, who's she gonna take it to? Obviously the US. So what? So you're gonna let all of your Russian people and family just die because you're gonna give up this medicine to this American astronaut who's obviously going to give it to her government? And when I first heard this, I thought that the whole thing was so stupid, because why on earth would Russia develop a top secret technology in the International Space Station? International Space Station. Why wouldn't Russia develop this technology in a safe underground bunker in Russia where they have access to it anytime they want? No, instead, they're developing in the International Space Station, where all of these other countries are, checking up on your business, and they're like, what are you working on? Let me see what you're up to. That was the silliest thing ever, and the fact that you just needed a key to have complete access to it, that didn't make any sense. Also, the International Space Station, it's in space. So if there's nuclear warfare, how are you gonna go up there and get it for your country to, medicate your people? So that to me didn't make any sense. Also, why didn't you have a backup of all of the research back in Russia? Why was it all backed up in the International Space Station? So when I first heard of this, I thought it was the dumbest thing ever. Okay, this was the dumbest thing I heard throughout the whole movie. This was dumber than this biologist just leaving her minds behind, doing whatever, floating around, getting tortured. This was dumber than astronauts getting drunk, in the International Space Station. This was the dumbest thing I've seen, in the movie at that point. And then turns out that Christian comes and he tells Kira, oh, there is no compartment zero, she was lying to you. And I was like, brilliant. I thought that was brilliant. I was like, okay, I'm so glad that was like a fake out, because I thought it was so stupid. So I was so thankful that that whole thing was a lie. That Christian says there's no compartment zero, and I was like, okay, thank God, because that sounded so dumb. And so we go to Veronica, and this girl I thought was trying to distract the Russians, but she was actually going to blow up the International Space Station, and I thought that was so dumb. At first I thought she was really smart, because I thought she was tricking the Russians into thinking she was going to blow it up, but no, she was actually going to blow it up. And then Christian kills her in a very violent and crazy way, but it's like, no, yeah, she was going to blow this whole station up. Like, hello, like that needed to happen. So I thought the way Veronica acted was kind of crazy, and it didn't seem like how like an astronaut would act in that situation. I mean, granted, her partner had died, and that was really tragic, but these are supposed to be very scientific people with a lot of protocols and trainings to deal with this kind of stuff. And the fact that her solution was to like blow up the entire space station, to me, it was wild and crazy. So I thought, okay, good. That was kind of like a good subverting of expectations. They introduced this idea of like a cure to radiation, which I thought was so stupid that they had it in the space station. But then it turned out that that was a lie by Veronica to like distract both the Americans and blow up the station. So I thought that was good writing. But then Turns out that no, Veronica wasn't lying, and there's actually a stupid radiation cure in the International Space Station. At that point in the movie, I was like, okay, whatever, I don't care, I'll just deal with it, because, you know, movie's ending, I'll just, you know, swallow this as the motivation for these people to get this cure and bring it back to Earth. And one of the things that I actually enjoyed about the movie is how Christian turns out to be kind of like the evil character at the end. I thought that was smart, but I thought that having his motivation to be the hero who brings the cure was silly, and it wasn't necessary, because throughout the movie, they keep saying that he has daughters. He has daughter, he has a family. So I think his motivation for stealing the medicine and bringing it to Earth shouldn't have been to be a hero and, like, you know, famous. His motivation should have been to treat his family. And the fact that the movie mentions his family so many times throughout the movie, but then doesn't use that as his motivation for him to bring back the medicine to Earth, it was such a missed opportunity. And I don't see why any of the writers that looked at the script pointed that out, because they talk about his family so many times. But I thought it was kind of nice that at the end we get one Russian and one American working together. And I like the fact that Alexei is kind of, when you first see him in the movie, you assume that he's the bad Russian, the evil Russian, who's like the more violent, more militaristic Russian. And he turned out to be the more loyal one of the two of them. So I thought that was a good touch. And I just thought that the ending of this movie was very hopeless, because you see this capsule going down to Earth, and it looks like they're gonna go in the ocean, because that's the part of Earth that they show at the end when they're going down. And also, like, what are they gonna do? Because even though they have the cure, they can only treat so many people. So who are they gonna give it to? You know, they're gonna give it to the US, they're gonna give it to Russia, we don't know. By having the Earth be so annihilated by the end, it kind of made it pointless. It kind of made it pointless to, like, bring back this cure, because it looked like, you know, they were pretty done. So that's what I wish, that we hadn't seen so many nukes and it had been a more low-key nuclear war, because I think that would have made it more kind of realistic, but also made going back to Earth kind of like make more sense. Okay, so these were my thoughts on the I.S.S. movie. I liked it overall, but I do think it's a little hard to sit through because it's so tense. But the writing at the same time, it does not take itself very seriously. And it treats its script like a very by-the-numbers Hollywood movie. I think if you like space movies, you'll probably like this one. But if not, you can, you know, skip this or wait until it's streaming. But those were my thoughts. Let me know if you agree with what I had to say about this movie. I know it sounds very negative. There are things I liked about this movie, but I think that if these things had been a little bit different, this movie could have truly been something special. So let me know what you think, leave a comment and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next time.